The prosecutor was about to lose the case. He had nothing. At that moment, a folded piece of paper was slipped into his hand by the court's silent stenographer. On it were not words, but a timestamp and a number. 11:32 a.m., 0.8 seconds. That number would change everything. Welcome to the Everyday Hero. Before we begin this story about how the greatest lies are hidden in the smallest silences and how justice is found by the most unexpected of heroes, tell us in the comments what city you're joining us from. And if you believe that experience and attention are the most powerful weapons, be sure to subscribe. But to understand the meaning of that piece of paper, we must go back 1 hour to the worst moment of young prosecutor Daniel Cross's career. The courtroom was shrouded in an electrically charged silence. Julian Thorne, the CEO of one of the country's largest holdings, sat in the witness box with his $1,000 suit, his confident smile, and his calm demeanor. He was the very embodiment of untouchability. Opposite him, the young and idealistic prosecutor Cross was playing his final cards. The case was a major financial fraud trial, and all of Cross's evidence had been dismantled, one by Julian Thorne's expensive army of lawyers. Cross, sweating, asked with one last move, "Could I ask you again where you were on the morning of March 12th, Mr. Thorne?" Julian Thorne, without a moment's hesitation, turned to the jury and answered, "As I've stated before, I was completely out of town that weekend. I was relaxing at my estate in the Hamptons." His voice was smooth and convincing. For Prosecutor Cross, this was the beginning of the end. Thorne's alibi was perfect, and he had nothing to refute it. He turned his back, ready to admit defeat. There was another man in the hall whom no one noticed. In the corner, at his stenography machine, whose clicks were barely audible, sat Arthur Finch, a man in his 60s. With his glasses, his white hair, and his slumped shoulders, this man was like a piece of the court's furniture. He was seen as just a machine that wrote down what was said. But Mr. Finch heard more than just words. He heard the spaces between the words, the pauses, the tiny rhythmic flaws in a person's breathing. When Julian Thorne gave that answer, he had paused for only 0.8 seconds, a pause shorter than a single second that no one else had noticed. But for Arthur, it was as valuable as a confession. It was at that moment that he walked to Prosecutor Cross's table and slipped him that small note. Now, let's return to that moment. Cross stared at the paper in his hand. 11:32 a.m. 0.8 seconds. It was meaningless. He lifted his head and looked at Mr. Finch. The old man had returned to his seat, his face expressionless, but his eyes were telling Cross, "Ask." Cross had nothing to lose. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request permission to ask one final question." Thorne's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. The prosecution is harassing the witness." But the judge's interest had been piqued. "Proceed, Mr. Cross," he said. "But this is your last question." Cross gathered all his courage and turned to Julian Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, a moment ago I asked you where you were on the morning of March 12th. You answered, 'I was at my estate.' According to our records, you paused for 0.8 seconds before giving that answer. Please, tell the court what was going through your mind in that brief moment." There was a moment of silence in the courtroom. Then Thorne's lawyer began to laugh. What an absurd question! But Julian Thorne was not laughing. The confident man was gone, replaced by someone with a tense face and a flash of panic in his eyes. "I don't recall a pause," he stammered. It was then that Cross found the crack he was looking for. "Let me remind you," he said, pressing on, "the official court records will show a hesitation. A small moment, perhaps, but a moment of thought. Were you deciding which lie to tell, Mr. Thorne? Julian Thorne's perfect facade shattered under this unexpected and strange question. He became defensive and angry, started contradicting his earlier testimony, and in the eyes of the jury, he transformed from an unshakable businessman into a cornered liar. That 0.8-second silence had completely changed the course of the trial. After the trial was over, prosecutor Daniel Cross went over to Arthur Finch, who was packing up his equipment. "Mr. Finch," he said with gratitude, "you saved my life, but I don't understand. How did you know? How did you notice that hesitation was important?" Arthur slowly closed the lid of his machine. He took off his glasses and looked at the young prosecutor with his tired eyes. "Words can lie, Mr. Cross, but time never does. Right before people lie, they need time to fight their own instinct to tell the truth. And 0.8 seconds, that's more than enough time for a war inside the mind." Daniel Cross didn't just win a case that day. He learned one of the most fundamental laws of human nature from the most unexpected of teachers. Arthur Finch was no ordinary stenographer. He was a former interrogation specialist who had worked for intelligence services years ago, a man who broke the most dangerous spies and master liars simply by analyzing the tiny changes in their voices and their pauses. When he grew tired of that world of lies, he had taken refuge in the silence of the courtrooms, where the truth, in its purest and most impartial form, was recorded. Sometimes the strongest evidence is not hidden in fingerprints or DNA samples, but in a moment of silence tucked between two words. Heroism is not always about loud actions. Sometimes the greatest heroism is hearing not what everyone else heard, but what no one else was listening to. Thank you for watching The Everyday Hero. If you believe that the sharpest mind is found in the most attentive ears, subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the next story.